The day Adaeze buried her 7th prayer journal, she finally stopped praying. Not because she was angry at God. She had passed through anger 3 years ago and come out the other side, hollow and quiet like a gourd scraped clean. She stopped praying because she no longer knew what words to use. Every sentence she had ever formed before God had been about one thing, one desire, one ache that lived in the center of her chest like a stone that refused to pass. And after 15 years, she had simply run out of ways to ask. She placed the journal, black, worn at the corners, its pages swollen with the moisture of her tears, into the small hole she had dug behind her kitchen. She covered it with red earth. She stood up, she dusted her hands, and she went inside to cook her husband's dinner. That was a Tuesday. By Sunday, everything had changed, but not in the way anyone expected. There was no one in Goshen Redeemed Assembly who did not know. Adaeze Obiachina and Enkionyerikachi Nwofor. They were like two rivers that had started from the same mountain but flowed in completely different directions. Adaeze was the quiet one. She sat in the 3rd row from the front, always on the left side, always alone because her husband, Emeka, only came to church at Christmas and Easter. For the children, he used to say, though they had no children. She wore simple clothes. She sang with her eyes closed and her hands folded in her lap. She was the kind of woman whose presence you only truly noticed when she was absent. Nkeo Nyedikachi, who everyone simply called Sister Nkeo, was impossible to miss. She arrived every Sunday with her 5 children arranged behind her like a small, beautiful army. Tobichukwu, the oldest, was 14 and already led worship with his father's guitar. Then came the twins, Chiamaka Oluchi and Chisomata Oluchi, who were 11 and impossible to tell apart, except that one always smiled and the other always seemed to be thinking about something serious. Then little Ogechi, 8 years old, who had her mother's laugh. And finally baby Chukwuemeka Jr., who was 4 and still occasionally fell asleep on the church bench. Anko's husband, Chukwuemeka, not to be confused with Adaeze's Emeka, though the similarity of their names was a joke the women in the church had long since stopped finding funny, was the assistant pastor. He was a large, loud, joyful man who called everyone champion and whose prayers could last 40 minutes on a slow Sunday. The two women had been friends since their youth service days, 2 decades ago. They had started this church together. They had fasted together. They had cried together. But life had given them different portions. And somewhere along the way, without either of them choosing it, a distance had grown between them. Not hatred, not jealousy, at least not the kind that either woman would have admitted to. Just the quiet, uncomfortable gap that opens between a woman who has what another woman is dying for. Every Sunday, Adaeze watched Nkeo's children run down the aisle. And every Sunday she smiled. And every Sunday she went home and sat in her kitchen for a long time before she could make herself stand up and cook. It was in January of that year, the same year, Adaeze buried her last journal, that Dr. Ejimofo Enzi called her into his office and closed the door in the particular way that doctors close doors when what they are about to say is irreversible. Dr. Enzi was a small, precise man who always wore a white coat even on weekends. He had been Adaeze's doctor for 6 years, and in that time he had delivered enough bad news to her that she had learned to read the angle of his shoulders before he even opened his mouth. His shoulders that day were very low. "Adaeze," he said, and he paused. He looked at the file in front of him. Then he looked at her. "The results from Abuja have come back." She had gone to Abuja because she had refused to believe the Lagos results. Before Lagos, she had gone to Enugu. Before Enugu, she had gone to Owerri, to a private clinic that a woman in her church had whispered about. A clinic where a doctor had told her to come back 3 times and charged her money. She and Emeka could not afford. "What do the results say?" she asked. Her voice was very calm. She had practiced calm for so many years that it had become her true face. Dr. Enzi told her. She listened. She nodded in the right places. She asked 2 questions. She thanked him. She stood up, straightened her wrapper, picked up her handbag, and walked out of the office, through the hospital corridor that smelled of antiseptic, and cooked beans from the canteen nearby, and out into the afternoon sun. She stood on the hospital steps for a long time, Then she went to the market and bought a goat head because Emeka had mentioned the previous week that he was craving goat head pepper soup, and she did not tell him what the doctor had said for 9 days. On the 10th day, she told him. Emeka sat at the kitchen table and looked at his hands for a very long time. He was a quiet man, her husband. Not cold, just a man who processed his grief inward, like water finding its way underground. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red. "Adaeze," he said. "I know," she said. "We can still—" "Emeka." She said his name softly, but with a firmness that closed the sentence. They both knew what the options were. They had discussed them all before. In the years before Abuja, before Lagos, before Owerri, adoption, fostering, the suggestions that well-meaning people gave, them in voices carefully pitched to sound casual. They had carried each option like a stone, turned it over, put it down again. That night, Emeka held her in their bed and she felt the trembling in his chest that told her he was crying without making any sound. She held him back. She stared at the ceiling. She thought about the journal she had buried. She did not cry. She had not cried in 2 years. She was not sure the water was still inside her. The annual church retreat was held every March at a small campground outside Ijebu Ode, in a place called Mount Carmel Camp, though it was not a mountain, only a modest hill with a single large tree at the top that everyone called the prayer tree, because so many people had gone there and returned with their testimonies. Adaeze almost did not go. She had gone every year for 12 years. 12 years of going up that hill and praying under that tree and coming home to an empty nursery. This year, the night before the bus was to leave, she sat on the edge of her bed and told Emeka she was not going. Emeka sat beside her. He did not argue. He simply said, "Go, not for a miracle, just go." She went. The first 2 days of the retreat passed without incident. There were messages, worship sessions, small group prayers. Sister Nkeo was there with her oldest son, Tobechukwu, who played the guitar so beautifully during evening worship that Adaeze closed her eyes and felt, for the first time in a long while, something loosen slightly in her chest. Not much. Just slightly, like the first small crack in a wall of ice. On the 3rd day, the guest minister was a woman. This itself was unusual. Her name was Pastor Oluwafunmilayo Adebimpe, and she was a small woman from Ibadan with gray hair and eyes that looked as if they had seen a great deal and decided, in the end, to be at peace with all of it. She preached from the story of Hannah. Adaeze had heard sermons on Hannah more times than she could count. She usually endured them, because they were always delivered as promises. Your Hannah season is over. Your womb shall open. And she had stopped being able to hold such promises without flinching. But Pastor Funmilayo did not preach Hannah as a fertility story. Hannah is not famous, she said quietly, because she got a child. She is famous because of what happened in her heart before the child came. She had a turnaround. Not in her womb first. In her soul. Adaeze's hands went still in her lap. The Bible says that after Hannah prayed, before she left the temple, before she went home, before anything changed in the physical, it says her countenance was no more sad. She had not received anything yet. No angel had confirmed it. No pregnancy test existed. But something had shifted. She had laid it down. She had said, "God, this is yours now. I give you my pain, my desire, and my outcome. All of it is yours." The camp was very quiet. "Some of you," Pastor Funmilayo continued, and her voice dropped lower, "have been holding your desire so tightly that your hands are bleeding. You are not trusting God, you are gripping God. And God is not asking you to grip Him. He is asking you to rest in Him. There is a difference." Adaeze felt a tear run down her face. She was so surprised she reached up and touched her cheek. She had not cried in 2 years, and now here was a single tear, quiet and warm, as if something inside her had, very carefully turned on a small tap. That night she went alone to the prayer tree on the hill. She stood under it for a long time. The night was warm. Insects made their steady sound in the bush around her. Stars were visible in the gaps between the tree's branches. She opened her mouth and the words came out, not polished, not rehearsed, completely without the dignity of her usual prayers. "God, I'm tired. I am so tired. I don't know how to ask anymore. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. I buried my journal because I thought, you were done with me, but I don't actually believe that. I don't know what I believe. I just know I can't carry this anymore the way I've been carrying it. So I'm putting it down. Right here. I'm putting it down. Not because I don't want it anymore. I still want it. I want it so much it has been eating me alive. But I'm putting it down because I trust you. I don't understand you. But I trust you. Do what you want. I'm done fighting. I'm just yours. She stood there a while longer. Then she went back down the hill and slept the deepest sleep she had had in 3 years. 7 weeks after the retreat, Sister Nikeo came to Adaeze's house at 7 in the morning without calling first. This was strange, and Keo always called. She was an organized woman who believed that showing up unannounced was a form of disrespect, a position she had held firmly for 20 years. So when Adaeze heard the gate open and looked out her kitchen window and saw Enkyo walking across her compound, in a dress she had clearly put on in a hurry. It was buttoned, incorrectly, one side hanging lower than the other. Adaeze knew something was wrong. She opened the door before Nkeo could knock. Nkeo's face was a confusion of emotions that Adaeze could not immediately read. She looked as if she had been crying, but also as if she had been laughing. Her eyes were swollen and bright at the same time. "Sit down," Adaeze said. Nkeo sat. Adaeze brought water. For a moment neither woman spoke. Then Nkeo said, "Chukwuemeka has been transferred. Her husband's company, an oil services firm, had offered him a position in Aberdeen, Scotland. A 3-year contract. The pay was transformative. The family would go. The children would go. They had 3 weeks to prepare." "Nkeo," Adaeze breathed. "That is wonderful." "Let me finish." Nkeo's voice was strange. "When he called me to tell me, Adaeze, my heart dropped. Not because I wasn't happy, because my very first thought was about you." Adaeze went still. "We have the flat," Nkeo said. "You know the flat, the 2-bedroom in Lekki. Phase 1 that we've been renting out? The tenants are leaving end of this month, and we were going to find new tenants. But Chukwuemeka and I talked last night and..." She stopped. Started again. "We want you and Emeka to use it. Live in it, not rent. Just live in it, however long you need. Chukwuemeka says he doesn't want the burden of managing it from abroad. And I told him, Adaeze needs a change of environment. She needs something new around her. New walls, new mornings, new streets. Sometimes when you've cried in the same room for too long, the room starts crying with you." Adaeze did not speak for a long time. "That's not all," Nkeo said quietly. She reached into her bag and brought out a folded paper. She set it on the table between them. Adaeze looked at it but did not touch it. "There is a woman," Nkeo said. "Her name is Uzuamaka. She lives in Abeokuta. She is 22 years old and she is 8 months pregnant, and she is alone, and she has been working with the Bethel Foundation. You know Sister Kalechi Obiora, who runs it? And Uzomaka has decided, she decided before she even knew about you, that she cannot keep the child. She wants the child to go to a Christian couple, someone who will raise this child in the fear of God." The room was very quiet. "Sister Kalechi called me 2 weeks ago," Nkeo continued. "She asked if I knew anyone. And Adaeze," Keo's voice broke here just slightly, "your name came out of my mouth before I could even think. I called Chukwuemeka and he said the same name. I prayed about it for 2 weeks before I came here because I did not want to bring you false hope." Adeze's eyes were fixed on the folded paper on the table. "It's not certain," Nkeo said. "Uzoamaka will still need to meet you. She has final say. There is a process. It could still..." "Stop," Adaeze said. She reached out. She picked up the paper. She unfolded it slowly. It was a photograph, printed in color on plain paper. A young woman with a very round belly, standing in front of a church mural, looking at the camera with an expression that was both frightened and determined. Adaeze looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she covered her face with both hands and she cried. Not the quiet, sealed-away crying of a woman who has learned to grieve in private. She cried the way a person cries when something that has been held underground for 15 years finally breaks through the surface, loud and uncontrolled and ugly and completely real. Nkeo came around the table and held her. She did not shush her. She did not say, "It's okay." She just held her and let her cry until there was nothing left. 6 weeks later, Adaeze and Emeka drove to Abeokuta. Uzuamaka was smaller than she appeared in the photograph and younger looking. She had wide, watchful eyes and a habit of wrapping her arms around her belly as she talked, as if she were already consoling the child inside her for what was coming. They sat in Sister Kelechi's office. Kelechi was a brisk, warm woman who ran the Bethel Foundation from a converted bungalow painted yellow, and they talked for 2 hours. Uzumaka asked questions that surprised Adaeze. Not about money, not about position, but about faith. Did they pray together in the house? What did they fight about, and how did they settle it? What would they tell the child about where it came from? Adaeze answered every question honestly. When Uzumaka asked about the empty nursery, because somehow she knew, because Sister Kelechi had told her, because she had asked, Adaeze did not dress it up. She said 15 years, and I buried my last prayer journal because I thought God had forgotten me. And then I found out He was not preparing my womb. He was preparing my heart. Because you cannot raise a child you haven't first surrendered. God knew that. I didn't know it yet, but He knew. Uzumaka was quiet for a long time after that. Then she nodded. The child, a girl, was born on a Thursday morning. She was small and loud and perfect. Uzumaka held her for 1 hour, and in that hour she whispered things into her daughter's ear that no one else in the room could hear. Then she kissed her forehead and passed her, with steady hands, to Adaeze. Adaeze held her and looked down at her face, and the face looked back with the unfocused, searching eyes of someone who has just arrived from a long distance and is trying to figure out where they are. Hello, Adaeze whispered. The baby made a small sound. Emeka, standing beside his wife for the first time in 15 years with tears running openly down his face, reached out one large hand and touched the baby's cheek with his finger. They named her Chidimmaoluwasun. It was a name they had chosen together, weeks before, lying in bed one night and trying out names the way you try on clothes. This one. No, this one? Maybe, this one. Chidimmaoluwasun. It meant, God is good and worthy of our thanks. Yes, they both said, that one. 8 months after Chidimmaoluwasun came home, Adaeze went to the place behind her kitchen where she had buried the journal. She dug it up. The cover was earth-stained and the pages had begun to soften and blur. She sat with it in her hands for a long time. She did not reread it. She did not need to. She knew what was inside. 15 years of asking, crying, hoping, losing hope, finding it again, losing it again. 15 years of God, please. God, why? God, when? God, are you there? She sat there until she heard from inside the house the sound of her daughter crying for her. That particular cry, the one that meant nothing was wrong, only that she wanted to be held. Adaeze set the journal down on the earth beside the hole. She stood up. She went inside. She picked up her daughter and held her against her chest. And the crying stopped immediately, the way it always did, as if the child had only needed to confirm that someone was coming. Outside, a light rain began to fall. It soaked the journal. It soaked the red earth. It soaked the small backyard where a woman had once stood and decided she was done, and where God had apparently decided something entirely different. This is the thing about heaven. It does not always choose the loudest prayer. It does not always choose the longest fast, the biggest faith, the most organized petition. Sometimes it chooses the prayer that has been broken down to its last syllable, the prayer that is nothing more than, I don't understand, but I trust you. And it holds that prayer the way a parent holds the most fragile thing they own. Nkeo had 5 children and a life full of beautiful noise. God had chosen her for that. Adaeze had tears and 15 years and 1 surrendered buried journal. And in the end, God had chosen her for something too. Heaven does not rank its choices. It simply makes them, in the fullness of time, with a precision that no human eye can track until the moment it becomes suddenly, undeniably clear. And when it becomes clear, you do not feel triumphant. You feel only the particular, quiet, overwhelming peace of a person who has waited a very long time in the dark and has finally seen the light come on. For I know the thoughts I think toward you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. Jeremiah 29:11.